Alright, welcome to Mr. Nelson's YouTube video. Today in class we talked about absolute value. And there were two things that I taught you about absolute value. One, that absolute value is always positive. And two, it is the distance your number is from zero. Alright, so if you don't know these two things, you need to know them after what we went over today in class. So if you weren't in class, know that absolute value of a number is always positive and always the distance from zero. Alright, so the examples that we went over in class, stuff like 3. Well, if we look at a number line, 3 is right here. And if I count the distance from 0, it's 1, 2, 3 away from 0. So the absolute value, which is what these two lines mean, the absolute value of 3 is 3. That's your answer. Okay? Another example we had was -3. So we've got our number line. -3 would be right here, -3, and it's 1, 2, 3 away from 0. So the absolute value, or the distance from -3 to 0, is 3. Okay? And that's what we talked about today in class, was just that absolute value is always positive. Okay? It's always positive. And it is the distance from 0. Okay? In those two cases. Alright. So, what we briefly talked about, the reason why we need to know absolute value is because when we add and subtract integers, we need to make sure that we know absolute value. Okay? Alright, so here is why. There are two rules for adding. There are two rules for adding and subtracting. Same sign, add, different sign, subtract. And I'll show you what I mean there in just a second. So our rules, same sign, add it, different signs, subtract. Okay? Alright, let's see what I'm talking about there. Alright, as you can see here, there's a sign in the front, and then there's not a sign in the front of that one. So we've got a negative number here. We've got a positive number here. Okay? So since they are different signs, and one is a negative and one is a positive, we're going to subtract here. So we're going to set up a subtraction problem. So since they are different signs, you can see one's a negative, one's a positive. We're going to subtract here. So put the bigger number on top, but we take the absolute value of 3. So the absolute value of -3 is 3. So 3 is there. Now we take the absolute value of 2, which is 2. Okay? 3 is going to be bigger than 2, so that's why we have it on top. 3 minus 2 is 1. Okay? But if you look up here, which one was bigger, 3 or 2? Well, 3, the absolute value for -3, was the bigger number. So we keep the sign of the bigger number, which is -1. Alright, we're going to learn this with some counters. If we had color counters, and we had red was negative, and so we've got -1, -2, -3. and then we had, let's say blue is positive. We only had 2 positive ones, right? -3, we've got the 3 counters. We've got -2 blue ones. If you look here, these are my 0 paired, because if I add 1 negative with 1 positive, they zero out. So what's left? 1 negative. Okay? All right, on the next one, are these the same sign? Well, we've got a negative and a negative. So same signs, you add. So we're just going to straight up add. 3, the absolute value of -3, and the absolute value of -5, well, are both 3 and 5. 3 plus 5 is 8, but they were both negative, so if they're both negative, they're just -8. All right, so let's look at it with color counters. We've got 3 negatives, and then we add 5 more. Well, how many do I have total? If you count that, there are 8. All right, the thing about subtraction is, if you know how to do adding integers, you know how to subtract integers. Okay, the reason why is because subtraction is lie. So in elementary school, they taught you how to subtract, and it's true, you can subtract. But in middle school, we're going to always add the opposite. So if you see subtraction, like in these 2 questions, we're going to always add the opposite. So we've got 3 minus 5. So instead of 3 minus 5, we're going to add the opposite. What's the opposite of 5? -5. Okay? So this is equivalent or equal. These are equal to each other. 3 plus -5, well, we just talked about that. This one's a positive, this one's a negative. If they're different signs, you set up a subtraction problem. Take the absolute value of each. The absolute value of 5 is 5. -5 is 5. The absolute value of +3 is 3. 5 minus 3 is 2. But we take the sign of the bigger number, the bigger absolute value, which was the -5. And so this is a -2 for an answer. If we look at it with color counters, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, I had to go off. And then we've got 1, 2, 3. And so this zeroes out, this zeroes out, this zeroes out. And what's left? Oh, I shouldn't circle it. What is left is 2 negative ones. Remember what I said. I said if you see subtraction, you add the opposite. So you take 2, and you're going to add the opposite of -5. And the opposite of -5 is +5. So really, this is the same thing as that. So you've got 2 plus 5, which we should know is just 7. If you really want to see it, we've got 1, oops. We've got 1, 2, plus another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. All right, so what you have to do on your sheet of paper, what we talked about just now was adding and subtracting integers, and that's what we're going to be working on for the next 2 days. But what you have to do for homework on your half sheet of paper for Monday night is you need to answer these questions. Question 1. The absolute value of -9 is what? Question 2. The absolute value of 56 is what? Question 3. 2 plus -3 is what? Okay. On the last one, if you want to think about it with color counters, or if you want to make 0 pairs, that would be great. Remember what 0 pairs are? It's where you make a little diagram like down here in the bottom right or bottom left. You've got negatives are red and positives are blue. You can make it like that to help you answer number 3 on your homework. First 2 are things that we went over in class and you've seen in the video. Sorry it ran a little past, but I had to put these 3 questions on and make sure you know what to do. Make sure you have on a separate sheet Monday, have these 3 questions. Make sure you put your name in the top right corner. Okay? All right.